Today we are taking a breather from going over all the highlights and the points and the records and all the crazy stuff that this Montreal Canadiens prospect has been accomplishing in the NCAA, and instead we're turning over to the Canadiens themselves and how, according to the family of said prospect, it was quite apparent to them that apparently the Toronto Maple Leafs might have been the team they would have projected their kid to be going to. Let's talk today about NCAA phenom Lane Hutson, and you do not need me to tell you anything about him because you have probably been watching all the videos going over his points, the crazy records, the Brian Leetch, Paul Coffey comparisons, and Quinn Hughes and Adam Fox and Cale Makar. Lane Hutson is a second-round pick made by the Canadiens, 62nd overall in the 2022 NHL Entry Draft, and he has been phenomenal with the BU Terriers. The fact is, he's only 5'8", and that's probably why he slipped down to the second round in the first place, but according to this article published on the Canadiens' website, there may have been some lingering ideas that a certain team just down to 401 was interested in taking this guy instead. The article was published yesterday at 10 a.m. PST. Rob Hutson on Lane says that Lane is just pure passion. Hudson's father shares some intel on the Habs prospect, who continues to thrive at BU. This was published by Matt Kudzanowski, and the article will be linked in the description if you want to go ahead and read this. But because this is kind of a look at the prospect Lane Hutson himself from the eyes of his father, I did want to go out there and read a lot of the quotes that are included here because it just kind of shines a little bit of an extra light to what Hutson is as a prospect, how he's been developing, and what the BU system is really allowing him to do. But the first thing that we have to talk about is the very first quote mentioned in this piece. Rob Hutson wasn't expecting his son Lane to be selected by the Canadiens. Heading into the 2022 draft, the former junior collegiate and pro hockey player believed that the smooth skating defenseman was actually bound for an Original Six rival. To be honest, we thought it was going to be Toronto the first day, shared Mr. Hutson. They had interviewed him multiple times before. But the Maple Leafs ultimately traded their first-round pick away to Chicago, and the Hutson family left the Bell Center on Thursday, July 7th, still wondering where Lane would land. Now this is the idea that I wanted to talk about here today. The Toronto Maple Leafs appeared to have been the team that the Hutson family thought Lane would be going to in the first place. They thought it would be a first-round selection, but if you go over to the Leafs and their first-round pick in 2022, you'll notice that at 25th overall, they actually traded the pick away, plus Peter Mrazek, to the Chicago Blackhawks in exchange for Chicago's second-round pick just, 13 draft picks later. Sam Renzel was the ultimate prospect taken by Chicago 25th overall, and if you want to get even more meta with the lore and how this connects with Montreal, the very next pick actually happened to be Calgary's first, which was sent over to Montreal in the Toffoli trade. They selected Philip Mesar 26. But Lego, what exactly are you talking about here? Toronto had themselves a pick later in the draft that would have allowed them to take Lane Hutson in the second round themselves. And yes, that is true. They did have the Chicago second at 38th overall, but instead of taking Lane, they ended up going with Fraser Minton, who is a Vancouver-born WHL prospect. He's 6'1", 185, and he's a pretty okay prospect. I mean, he's a guy that's producing pretty okay in the WHL right now as a center. But at the same time, the idea that Toronto was interested in Lane this entire time too, due to the extensive interview process they went out and accomplished with him, makes it kind of interesting when you acknowledge who went before Lane in the first place. We already acknowledged that Lane is 5'8", which is why he slipped so far down in the draft. And heck, even Montreal, we already talked about how they had the Philip Mesar pick and, of course, the Slafkovsky pick there. They also had the first pick in the second round, selecting Owen Beck. So before they selected Hutson at the end of the second, Montreal themselves had 3 picks before going Lane. Toronto did not have their own second-round pick in the 2022 draft. They only had the pick swapped around with Chicago. This was because their own second in 2022 was sent over to Seattle in the Mark Giordano trade. So the Leafs really had only one opportunity to take Lane Hutson after they went through that extensive draft process, and they ended up not taking him. Instead, they took Fraser Minton. And so the reason I bring this up is because it's quite interesting, kind of acknowledging what could have been in some sort of alternate reality, because if you were to ask me right now, okay, let's take a look at Fraser Minten and his 22 points in 16 games played in the WHL, and compare that with Lane Hutson and his super good point record of 17 points in now 14 games. He went pointless in the last game, unfortunately. I mean, Hudson's a D-man, Minton's a center. Minton is playing in a league that's a lot younger and a lot higher scoring than the NCAA. Lane Hutson is doing what he's doing against men. And he's putting himself in a category that only has really been touched by guys like Brian Leetch, and we saw the comparison to Paul Coffey, Adam Fox, everybody else in the NCAA's history. This is kind of the territory that Hutson has established for himself. And if you were to take a time machine back to the draft day on July 7th and the 8th, you probably would have said, hey man, this Lane Hutson dude is going to be incredibly solid starting out his NCAA career, and he's going to be one of the best 18-year-old defenders this league has seen in years. Like, we talked about Luke Hughes just a little bit ago. This guy's going to have a better 18-year-old year than Luke. Or he's going to be on pace to doing so. At the moment, he hasn't done it yet. But yeah, you get what I mean, right? If Toronto just kind of had that hindsight, we're probably seeing Lane Hutson suiting up in a Leafs jersey at development camp and everything, etc., etc. And Toronto, with their need for defense, probably would see a lot of value out of a guy like Lane Hutson, even though he is only 5'8". We had seen the Leafs take a swing on Nick Robertson, and so far he has been, admittedly, probably a little bit worse off than his brother, but at the same time, Robertson had a really good stock as well. So the Leafs are not afraid to go small. Montreal's not afraid to go small either. The fact that the Hudsons themselves believe that Toronto would be the team is quite interesting to me, because if you think about what could have happened, I mean, a power play with Lane Hutson, Marner, Matthews. Just kidding, Matthews is going to leave and go to Arizona. Ha ha ha, I'm joking. But that would be quite something, wouldn't it? Let's go back over to the article and finish off this video by talking about the quotes from Rob Hutson going over his son, Lane. As crazy as it is, we were sitting right in front of Kent's wife, Dina, with our assigned seating. So it was weird because Kent was always kind of looking up in our direction before making the pick. I thought he was just missing his wife. I couldn't really catch on at the time, recalled Mr. Hutson with a laugh. When they announced Lane's name, though, it was just excitement and relief. That day was very emotional. This is what Rob says about his son and the way he views competition. I don't think Lane knows the difference between levels. Everybody is created equal when the puck drops. He doesn't see a 6'6" guy across from him. Even if he's playing against older guys, he wouldn't see a guy out there playing for keeps to feed his kids. He's just another hockey player. That's probably a very good quality, and it's going to help him for a long time. Rob also talks about how his son loves the sport. He is just pure passion. That's what he is, and he wants to be the best at everything he does. I think that passion to compete comes from being raised with his three brothers, from the environment they've created. Their mother, Julie, is also extremely competitive. She was a gymnast on the U.S. Junior Olympic team, so she knows what training is and she knows what commitment to your craft is as well. Other parts of the article go over Lane's childhood and how Rob helped develop his sense for sporting and personality, etc., etc. It was really nice to go out there and read. The link will be in the description if you want to go ahead and see this. But I just wanted to make this video to go over the what-if hypothetical scenario on if the Toronto Maple Leafs ended up using their pick on Lane Hutson. And I'm not talking specifically the first round, because that's the pick that Lane's father goes out there and mentions in particular, but just the Maple Leafs in general, because they did trade down into the second round, the early second round that is, and ended up taking another prospect who is not Lane Hutson, and who happens to be just a bit bigger and in the WHL, and a center too. Quite different profiles right there, but at the end of the day, I am quite happy the Canadiens ended up getting this guy, because for the sake of my freaking YouTube videos, man, having a guy in the NCAA tearing things up in the way that he is as a Canadiens guy, ooh, baby, it's a formula that works. And sure, I may be going out there and saying that I like the Lane Hutson pick because it gives me material to talk about every week, but at the same time, I like the Habs, so having good prospects that are shattering records and being better than Cale Makar is indeed noteworthy to me. So talk to the comments your thoughts about the idea of Hutson over to Toronto. What do you think about the comments made by Rob on his son and his son's development? What are your thoughts on the Leafs taking Fraser Minten instead of Lane, even though the Hudsons thought that Toronto would be picking Lane? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this Juraj Rolls 99. And bye.